Thank you very much for your kind invitation and this possibility to deliver my talk today. So I will speak about the Biblioteka Brejniana, so the collection of books belonging to Johann Philipp Brejne and his father, Jakob Brejne. So in the year 1744, 20 years before his most lamented death, the 64-year-old naturalist from Danzig in Polish Prussia, so present-day Gdańsk in Poland, Johann Philipp Brejne, stated in one of his letters to Albrecht von Haller, and here you can read some excerpts, quote, "Well, I do not know in what kind of hands the library, herbariaua, and other beautiful natural objects collected by my blessed father and me myself for so many years with great effort and great expense will end up after my demise." The end of quotation. In 1733, Johann Philipp Brejne's youngest son died prematurely in Gdańsk at the very early age of 12, and it was a great tragedy both for the whole family and for the father himself. And for the father, it was even the greater loss than for the other members of the family, because he wanted the boy to become his successor in natural history. In turn, in 1740, in London, the secretary of the Royal Society, Hans Sloane, and privately a very close friend and colleague of Johann Philipp Brejne, buried his older and then the only son, who died suddenly in England as a result of an unknown disease. By the time of his own death, Johann Philipp had also buried 4 of his 5 daughters, and he was survived only by one unmarried daughter, Henrietta, an old maid, who was forced to marry one of his proteges in order to manage the inherited property, all movable and all immovable things. In 1765, the vast collection of natural objects belonging to the Brejnes, so Muzeum Brejnianum, was auctioned off and sold to Russia for more than 8,000 florins. The library was auctioned in 2 parts, on July 15th, 1765, and April 14th, 1766, to various buyers coming from Polish Prussia, Russia, Poland, German-speaking countries, English-speaking countries, and so on and so forth. And it costed approximately 4,000 florins. In later years, the Danzigers and various visitors to Danzig were more likely and more apt to write about the Brejnes Museum of Natural Objects than the library. For example, Bernoulli, in his travels through Brandenburg, Pommern, Prussia, and so on, and so forth, mentioned that numerous members of the Naturforschende Gesellschaft in Gdańsk, so the scientific society, very specific one, in Gdańsk, were involved in sorting out and packing the natural history collection of the Brejnes before it was dispatched to Russia. The story of the library sale is more complex and more complicated as far as I see it. It was actually sold in 3 rather than 2 parts, and the auction of the first part of the library was scheduled to take place in summer 1765, while the second part was scheduled to take place in early spring 1766. At the same time, also the collection of naturalia and the collection of coins and medals was sold. However, when we are speaking about library, we will find no information about the upcoming auctions in the local press announcements. So I assume that from the very, very beginning, the sellers wanted to find the buyers from outside Polish Prussia and from outside Gdańsk. Nowadays, the exhibits, manuscripts, books, naturalia, and other objects pertaining to the Museum Brejnianum and Biblioteka Brejniana are dispersed in various European institutions and may be found in various countries like Germany, Russia, Switzerland, the Netherlands, United Kingdom, and so on and so forth. Yet, we need to bear in mind that some of these exhibits, including books and manuscripts, are also in private hands. So, for example, you can see here at this slide that 4 years ago, the exemplar of Plantarum Seu Scriptum Iconets by Lobelius from Biblioteka Brejniana was sold in Germany for 6,000 euros. It was a private book sale, of course. Whereas in the year 2003 at Christie's in London, this herbarium belonging to the Poznanės and pertaining to Biblioteka Brejniana was sold for more than 2,000 pounds. The story of this library is more complicated, as I said. We also need to remember that various hand exemplars belonging to the family were sold not during these auctions in Gdańsk in 1760s, but they were also sold to various buyers in 1719s when Henrietta Brejne died, and the widowed man was deciding to sell her heritage. So various hand exemplars, so personal copies of Brejne's publishings, together with the Brejne's personal manuscripts, so we can call them ego documents, and various drawings by the Brejnes were sold to Germany in the 1790s, and it happened, as I said, after the demise of Johanna Henrietta Brejne, Nekassel, and this part of the library was sold for 150 Friedrichdor. And as you can see here, if such a sum of money had not been obtained, most likely this part of book collection would have gone to Russia. But we are getting back to the catalogue now. The catalogue of Brejne's books sold on auction in Gdańsk was divided into two parts and printed by Bartelsen Publishing Office. The first part concerned books to be sold in 1765, and the second, these which were to be sold in 1766. The catalogue included more than 5,000 items, and among others, these were co-bounded books and Sammelbände with dissertations. This catalogue enlisted philological, philosophical, historical, and other books, also various travelogues and itineraries, and in appendices, the so-called female readings in Dutch, French, and German. These were the books belonging to the daughters of Johann Philipp Brejne. Yet the main focus of this collection was, of course, medicine, botany, and natural history. Why? Johann Philipp Brejne was a physician and naturalist, whereas his father, Jacob, was one of the most renowned botanists living in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in the 17th century. Moreover, we may call this library a complete botanical library in the sense used by Linnaeus in his writings. And also it's worth to be emphasized that Linnaeus was a colleague, a pen pal of Brejne, Johann Philipp Brejne, and he was exchanging books and manuscripts with him. The complete sale catalog of Biblioteka Brejniana is really rare and hard to find nowadays. And one of the exemplars, which is in the holdings of the Gdańsk Library of the Polish Academy of Sciences, is even more unique, I will say, as it contains marginal handwritten, as you can see here, notes on prices of a few items from this collection. So, for example, here on your right, you can see various, let's call them after Linnaeus, sumptus books. For example, for instance, you can find here that the Anatomical Atlas by Govert Bydlu, a really marvelous book, was sold for 70 florins, whereas Maria Sibylla Merian's De Generatione Insectorum was sold for 53 florins. But at the same time, this catalog and this collection comprised also very cheap books, like, for example, Rabarbarogia Curiosa, which was sold for only 6 groschen, and 6 groschen was a cost in Danzig of buying a goose. As together with my colleague Bartłomiej Siek, who will present his talk tomorrow, we are still working on a database concerning the catalog of Biblioteka Brejniana, but also other selected catalogs of personal libraries belonging to naturalists and physicians from 18th century Gdańsk. I won't give you a systematic overview and review of book prices in this catalog. In turn, I will focus on selected examples to show you the material and unmaterial value of selected books from this collection. So, we all know that the library, the modern library, was always a proof of friendship. Just like in collections and gardens, people, ideas, specific practices and goods were meeting there and circulating. Johann Philipp Brejne, as many other naturalists, was borrowing, lending, buying, giving, showing, etc. books to, from, for, etc. his numerous friends and colleagues. And as the access to foreign books in Polish Prussia was somehow limited, Brejne was regularly lending the items from his library to his colleagues in Elbing, present-day Elbląg, Thorn, present-day Torun, but also Königsberg, so present-day Kaliningrad. One of these colleagues, Nathanael Zendel, while working on animal inclusions in ambers from the Royal Collection in Dresden, was asking Brejne frequently to provide him with various publications on insects. And the question is why? As Zendel stated in one of his letters to Brejne, dated February 1724, quote, "Denn eine große Bibliothek ist bei einem armen elbingischen Physiker nicht zu finden." So you won't find a vast library by a poor general practitioner in Elbląg. One of the books Johann Philipp lent him was Metamorphosis et Historia Naturalis Insectorum by Johannes Gedert, and you can see this book here. 3 volumes published in the 1660s in Dutch Middelburg were afterwards bound all together in pale pergamene. You can see it on your left. And the final item was described in the auction catalog as full of colorful, beautiful pictures. This book was sold during the first auction, and it costed 12 florins. It was bought by one of the members of Naturforschende Gesellschaft in Gdańsk, and afterwards it was donated to the library of this society. Nowadays, this item is kept in the holdings of the Nicolaus Copernicus University Library in Thorn, and it is the only item pertaining to the Biblioteka Brejniana in Thorn at the moment. And Zendel was commenting on this book and was giving thanks to his colleague for borrowing this book to him in this Historia Succinorum Corpora Aliena. And as we are speaking, as our conference language is English, I will focus now only on English things. So I will show you how Brejna was exchanging and buying books for and from one of his British colleagues, William Sherard. From the very beginning, these two persons, two naturalists and learned men, were exchanging books. For example, Sherard was regularly asking Brejna for books referring to natural history in Eastern, Central, and Northern Europe, which were not easy to be bought in England, and always he was stating that he will pay money for them. In turn, Brejna was asking him for books which were not so easy. 4 more slides. And as you can see, Brejna was asking his colleague to send him books which were easily obtained in England. At the same time, he was given books by his colleagues, like, for example, Hans Sloane. And indeed, Hans Sloane was giving him and sending him the books he was publishing himself and he was authoring, like, for example, 2 volumes of his History of Jamaica. And as you can see here in this catalog, auction catalog, one of the members of Naturforschende Gesellschaft bought these 2 volumes for 130 florins. Also, these guys were trying to exchange manuscripts. Some of these manuscripts were commenting on local fauna and flora. And one of such manuscripts, which was borrowed by Sherard, was a manuscript on mushrooms. And as you can hear, it was sent back to Danzig afterwards, and also other persons, naturalists, were working on it. And it was sold to another member of Naturforschende Gesellschaft for 42 florins and 25 groschen. Nowadays, this manuscript is missing. It's a war loss. Other things are herbaria picta. As you can see here, this library comprised also herbaria picta, which were pretty pricey. It also comprised various herbaria viva, which were pretty cheap. As you can see, Herbarium vivum with Eastern plants from India by Paul Hermann was sold for only 4 florins, which is really a very, very small amount of money. And last but not least, these persons were not giving books to their colleagues. They were buying and selling the books for them. Usually in the correspondence, in the letter exchange of Brejna and Sherard, but also Brejna and other persons, we find information about payments. How much would be paid, what for would be paid, and when would be paid. In such letters, we also find information about extra costs. For example, the transport, the shipping of books from one country to another, from one collector to another collector. And also we are finding in his correspondence, so Brejna's correspondence with Sherard and other naturalists, also the lists of prices of the books which were bought for him and sent for him. So, for example, here you can see on your left such books as, for example, Hoffmann's Medicina Rationalis Systematica, which was bought in German-speaking lands for Brejna. This book costed 2 florins and 4 groschen, and was sold at auction for 9 florins, and so on and so forth. So we can compare these prices from the letters with the prices from the catalog and just see how they were changing over time, how the price of the book was changing over time. Moreover, in these letters, we may find various information on costs of shipping of books from, for example, Italy to Germany, and afterwards from Germany or German-speaking lands to Danzig. So, were they buying or giving the books? And was buying or was giving of books a real deed of friendship? Usually, when we are speaking about friendship, we need to remember that only some books were treated as gifts. The person who wanted to give someone a gift, a present, was always trying to find such a book that the other person could not afford and find by himself. If such a person was, if, for example, Brainer was sending and giving books as gifts to Sherrod was sometimes complaining that many of them he could afford by himself in England, thus he's not treating them as real gifts. So what was sent as gifts? Personal authored publications, doublets from the libraries, and publications of close friends and colleagues. Also, at the early stage of acquaintanceship between two naturalists, everything what the partners was asking for was treated as a gift. In other situations, these were books bought to someone, and persons were waiting for repayment, in money, of course. So, what Biblioteka Bryniana really was? For sure, it was an embodiment of economic, cultural, social, and symbolic capitals of its owners, both Johann and Jakob Philipp Brainer, and afterwards the other owners. It was a status symbol. It was a resultant of social networking of these persons. It was a research tool for the owner of this library, but also for his colleagues. And it was a really family investment monetized by the hires. When we are thinking about value and cost, we shall just remind ourselves the Zedler lexicon and its definition of value. It is eine eingebildete Größe, wodurch die Sachen geschickt werden, ein Verhältnis gegen einander zu bekommen und Folgendes sich anmessen zu lassen. So, when we are thinking and speaking about the cost of this collection, the cost and price and value of Biblioteka Bryniana, I think that we shall refer to various historical sources. On one hand, to the catalog, the auction catalog. On the other hand, of course, to his correspondence. On the third hand, to the letters of his friends, which are commenting his behaviors and his library, and to various and numerous publishings, which are referring, of course, historical publishing, which are referring to the books, manuscripts, and other objects from this collection, which were used and studied by the authors of these publications. So, thanks a lot for your patience and your attention. And if you will have any questions or queries, I'm here to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for such an interesting presentation that show us part of history of book collection and book circulation in the 18th century. It's indeed a beautiful collection and the sources are great to study it. Now we are going to move to the 16th century though, and we are going to listen to the presentation by Justyna Kiliańczyk-Zięba. She's an assistant professor. Hello, Justyna. She's an assistant professor at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, and she is a well-known professor here in Poland, concentrating and focusing her research on printing in the printing and printers in the 16th century. And today we are going to hear a paper on book collecting in 16th century Krakow. Please go on.
So thanks a lot for this kind introduction and for having me here. And I'm also very happy to have my talk after the presentation by Katarzyna Pękacka, because I think that these talks will talk to each other, even though we heard about the 18th century collection and I will be speaking about the 16th century collection. You'll see that there are certain areas of interest that overlap. So my paper is also about a library of a physician. It's a medical library, a library of Anton Schneeberger. Schneeberger was a Zurich-born medical doctor and a disciple of Konrad Gessner. But he was active in Kraków, the capital of the Kingdom of Poland. So we are now moving south. Rather than thinking through the lens of centers and peripheries, as the conference theme suggests, I want to propose trying to shed some light on sociality and speciality of book circulation in early modern Europe. And I think that Katarzyna was doing this in her paper as well. But first, let me introduce Anton Schneeberger. He was born at the beginning of 1530s, in 1530 or perhaps 1534, to a patrician family in Zurich. In his native town, Anton studied under Konrad Gessner, who worked as a teacher of natural history and ethics in Schola Tigurina. As was customary, Schneeberger continued his education in Basel. Then, in 1553, as a very young man, he arrived in Kraków for the first time, and he registered at the Kraków University. After more than 3 years in Poland, Schneeberger traveled back to Zurich. He studied in Paris and in Montpellier, but in 1558, so after perhaps 2 years, he came to Kraków again. Even though he traveled to Lithuania, he was invited to be a court physician of the Radziwiłłs, and to Prussia, he finally settled in the capital of Poland, that at the time was an established seat of power, learning, and trade in its part of Europe. When he was working in the capital of the Polish kingdom, Schneeberger enjoyed a successful professional career as a medical practitioner, a physician. But he also had leisure to devote himself to scientific studies. And you can see in this slide the fruits of these scientific studies. His writings covered pharmacology, botany, knowledge on minerals and fossils, and of course, medicine. And as you can see in the slide, he had published his works with Kraków printers. At the time, Kraków, where printing started in 1473, was the biggest printing hub in its region of Europe, even if the output of local producers targeted mostly at the domestic market and at the neighboring regions to the east and to the south. It comes as no surprise that the well-off and well-read Schneeberger assembled a substantial library. In the slide, you can see an inventory of this collection, part of it. It was compiled in 1581, soon after Anton's death in the same year. Thankfully, it has been preserved, and it gives us a clue of how big Anton's collection was. It lists more than 500 items, more than 500 volumes, and many of them are Sammelbände. It is thus reasonable to assume that in all, Schneeberger's Kraków collection must have contained more than 1,000 printed items. More importantly, the titles and authors' names listed in this inventory suggest an overall picture of Schneeberger's library, the reading library of a physician with scholarly aspirations, someone who was interested in other practical disciplines such as botany, but also in literature and in history. His library was dispersed after his death. As we have heard, it's a common story in history of books and collections, but some of Schneeberger's books are still in existence. I know of more than 130 printed items, the majority preserved in Sammelbände. The biggest part of the collection has been preserved in Kraków, in the library, in an ecclesiastical library, the Carmelite Library, and in the library of the university, the Jagiellonian Library. And there are also other smaller chunks of this library dispersed in Poland and outside the country. These items can be identified. This is part of the collection in the Carmelite Library, but this is an important slide as the items that once belonged to Schneeberger can easily be identified thanks to the mark of ownership they bear. As you can see, there are book plates pasted into some of the volumes, very characteristic with his burgher coats of arms, but also ownership inscriptions that the physician annotated his copies with, and he usually kept it simple. He would, for example, scribble Antoni Schneebergeri S. But more interestingly, for our purpose, some of the books on the title pages bear notes about time of the acquisition. And you can see examples in this slide. We have dates, and in some of the books, Schneeberger also noted the name of the place where he had bought his book. So Krakowie, Wrocławiu in Silesia, Krakowie in Sarmatia. These notes suggest two things. First, that Schneeberger bought his books first and foremost in Kraków. And second, that he had limited opportunity for quick first-hand acquisitions of imported specialized texts in his discipline. There is usually a time gap of a year or two between a date of publication of an item and a date of acquisition. We are in the 16th century, and 16th century Kraków was the dominant book center of the Kingdom of Poland, with its own production, but also local bookmen importing hundreds of thousands of copies from the German lands, Italy, France, and the Low Countries. But apparently, we can see that the spatial constraints played a role here, as did the size of the regional market for medical books, for specialized books. It existed, but it was not absorbent enough for the specialized books to be imported here immediately, right after they were published. But thankfully, in Kraków, as elsewhere in Europe, the regular book trade was augmented with informal networks. And we have also heard today that this continued into the 18th century. Provenance notes in some of Schneeberger's books provide evidence that they were not bought by Anton, but rather given to him. The most prominent of these donors was Anton's former teacher, Konrad Gessner, a physician and botanist, famous for his systematic work on plants, animals, and books. It's well known that both men were in touch for many years, because Schneeberger's name resurfaces in Gessner's works among dozens names of scholars who sent Gessner information for his ongoing projects, and Gessner used to thank them. In the slide, you can see a copy of a book, Carmen de Statura Bisontis, a work about aurochs that used to live in the north of Poland and in Lithuania, that Schneeberger sent his master. This copy is now in Zurich, and it has been identified as part of Gessner's private library. But volumes that were owned by Schneeberger, volumes that I study, further evidence this exchange. In this slide, you can see a folio of Gessner's Historia Animalium, published in 1558 in Zurich. It's a copy dedicated to Schneeberger by its author in 1559. You can see a dedication note stating that Gessner gave this book to his special friend, his amico singulari et clarissimo suo, Conradus Gessnerus dono dabat. A little to the right, above, at the same title page, there's a note in the spidery handwriting of Schneeberger, who writes main mentionem facit, and he lists page numbers where Gessner acknowledges his assistance in collecting information for this work. This massive volume is a relatively early gift, but Schneeberger must have also kept receiving books from Gessner later on. He inscribed this copy, the copy visible in the slide, printed in Strasbourg in 1565, with a note commemorating the fact that the volume had been sent to him to Kraków by Gessner in March 1565, so apparently immediately after it became available on the market. Another equally rapid acquisition was Gessner's De Omni Rerum Fossilium Genere. And here you can see Schneeberger's note evidencing the fact that he had already acquired the book in 1565, so the year when it was produced, and that it was brought to him by Andrzej Szatkowius. This Szatkowius was one of the managers of the salt mines in Bieliczka in Kraków, and Gessner dedicated to him De Rerum Fossilium, the 8th part of this publication. Gessner died unexpectedly the same year, 1565. His estate and library went to one of his students, Caspar Wolf. Wolf also succeeded him as the town physician, and he was a peer and a colleague of Schneeberger too. Both men must have remained in touch, and this is evidenced by this copy, a copy of an anthology where Wolf promises to edit the late Gessner's history of plants. The dedication note shows that the book was a gift from Wolf to an old friend, as he calls Anton, and that the donor presented Schneeberger with the book in 1566. That is, again, very soon after it was printed in Zurich, in spring of the same year. These notes of ownership and provenance evidence cultural, intellectual, and material. This was stressed in the previous paper too, material exchanges between people and territories. The circulation of ideas and knowledge thanks to the mobility of their carriers, that is, books. Scribbles in Schneeberger's books manifest the fact that these volumes were key tools in communication between former colleagues or between a master, Gessner, a scholar of international renown, and his student, a much less illustrious doctor. So between people active in centers of knowledge and scholarly publishing, and a man working in what they called sarmatia. And I wish I had letters, as Katarzyna has, but I don't have any ego documents concerning this book's exchange between Schneeberger and his peers. So my only material are notes left in these books. It's true that Schneeberger had an eye-catching book plate and that he owned some precious copies, but certainly he was not a status collector, rather a scholar and practitioner, and I think he needed books for his work and did not aim to create a library for display. Like many of contemporary reading collections, Schneeberger's library contained mostly books found in limp parchment, judging by the books I have been able to identify so far. And these cheap, serviceable bindings and the prominent presence of Sammelbände amongst Anton's books seem to suggest that Schneeberger usually bought the copies unbound, perhaps mostly first-hand, but there were also volumes that Schneeberger must have bought second-hand, or books that were given to him as used books. Evidence for this is sometimes provided by bindings, for example, bindings made in the first half of the century. But more importantly, and I think more interestingly, it's evidenced by signs of series of exchanges among book owners. Perhaps the most interesting of these are books that passed on to Schneeberger, but first belonged to Georg Joachim Rheticus, a scholar a generation older than Schneeberger, well remembered today as Copernicus' first disciple, the one who was behind the publication of the Revolutionibus. Items from Schneeberger's library suggest that both men exchanged books while they were living in Krakow. Rheticus settled here in 1553 at the latest, and around the same time Schneeberger came to town for the first time. In Krakow, Rheticus earned his living as a medical practitioner while also continuing his astronomical observations. Their paths crossed not only because 16th century Krakow was a small world where everybody knew everybody else. Above all, Rheticus and Schneeberger had shared interests, worked with the same Krakow printers, enjoyed the support of the same patrons, powerful magnates, protector of Calvinism, such as Jan Bonner, and in general, they moved in similar social circles. I have so far identified 3 copies that first belonged to Rheticus and then to Schneeberger. And honestly, I don't know if 2 of them were not bought by Schneeberger. Perhaps this one was also not a gift, but an acquisition, a book Schneeberger paid for, but I don't know. As you see, this is a folio collection of case stories, medical case stories. And on its title page, Schneeberger noted that Rheticus passed this book to him when he was preparing to leave Krakow for what was then called Upper Hungary and is now Slovakia. Rheticus left Krakow for Košice, and he died there very soon in 1574. I'm heading towards my conclusion. For intellectuals, for physicians like them, like Rheticus and Schneeberger, taking part in the circulation of books beyond the commercial market must have been the affirmation of social and intellectual ties, a sign of mutual recognition. And I would like to suggest some conclusions, finishing my talk. I think that these books, Schneeberger's books, constitute research material that brings into focus early modern transfer of books and knowledge, practices of collecting books and storing information. Studying the remnants of this medical library can contribute to our understanding of pan-European trade in books, in this case, specialized medical books. At the same time, these volumes document the circulation of books beyond the commercial market, and they reveal the networks within the scholarly community. They evidence material and intellectual exchanges between people and territories, and they suggest that through books, social connection was maintained and made visible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Justyna, for giving us such a detailed presentation on Schneeberger's private library. So we've heard 2 papers on similar subjects, and we have an open field for discussion now. If you have any questions, please ask either on the chat or by putting up your hand. So please go on.
Can I ask a question, using the opportunity that I'm still
of course
visible? I have a question for Katarzyna, because I think that it's really interesting to see how these collections have things in common. And I wanted to ask you because you have so many sources, you have the catalog, you have correspondence, you have other sources, and what about the books themselves?
So, as I said, I never saw these books which are in hands of private collectors, as these are the private items at the moment, and no one wants to reveal the pedigree, of course, of these books. It's obvious, but I have already seen the books from this library in the holdings of Gdańsk Library of the Polish Academy of the Sciences, in Germany, in Great Britain, in the Netherlands, and so on and so forth. Most of them are the books with marvelous binding and, of course, with super ex libri. So with a coat of arms of the family and another super ex libri. Most of these books do have super ex libri as well. I have already showed you how they look like. They are in full color with golden bordura and so on and so forth. The other books which I saw has only some marginal notes where Brainer is just naming himself as the owner. The other books from this collection, which I know that was a part of this collection, have only some notes of provenance and acquisition from the librarians. So they are just stating that this book was a book from this book collection. But I don't know when they were acquired by these libraries, unfortunately, and so on and so forth. So up till now, I have seen around 100 books from this collection. But as I said, there were more than 5,000 books in these collections, together with various Sammelbände. And still, we don't know if these Sammelbände are still treated as Sammelbände or if they were put in pieces and sold in pieces as well. Because, for example, the binding was not so marvelous and so on and so forth. So indeed, we also have the books themselves, but not as many as I would like to have, because it's the 18th century collection, of course. So you cannot compare the scope and the number of the books with the collection from the late 16th century.
Yeah, but these books, they are beautiful. And you said that they were also a sign of status, social position. Yes, I mean, it's different in the 16th century. There were medical collections like this, but not the case of Schneeberger. In your case, obviously, he wanted to show off as well.
Yes, indeed. It was one of the functions of this collection, also to show off, to show who he was and who he knows as well.
Yeah, to build this social status, public persona. Yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We've got also another question. This one is for Justyna, I think. The question is in the chat from Hervé Baudry, who is asking about the copies of Gessner's works. Did you find any evidence of textual censorships within the books? And if yes, are these copies digitized?
No, I have not found any the evidence of censorship evidence, and I wonder why you asked this question, because maybe I should know something and I don't know it. Schneeberger was reading these books, and the copies I know about have not been digitalized. Schneeberger was reading Gessner's books. I think that in the books I saw, because in general, if you look at this collection, these books are heavily annotated. And when he was reading Gessner's books, he did the same. He would annotate the copies with his own observations, and he would underline, he would make notes in the margins. And he was following what was going on so in the market, and he was also buying Gessner's works. If you look at the inventory, I have not made a very detailed comparison yet, but it seems he had at least 20 different works by Gessner, and these were mostly books that were of interest to him. So, about botany, about animals, and I showed you the one about fish.
There is an answer from our speaker in the chat that it was not about censorship by the reader, but from institutional controls like authorities. Because Gessner was heavily censored in the indexes of forbidden books.
No, nothing at all. And also, I think it's too early for Poland to have this kind of censorship signs. The books I have looked at, yes, the books I have looked at, they used to be part of institutional libraries. I mean, the university library was and is an institutional library. The books in the Carmelite library, they were in the 16th century, in the 17th century, they were in private hands. So there was also, there were no, they weren't books in the, for example, ownership of a Jesuit college. Yes, we know that Jesuit librarians would cross out sections, and they would mark certain passages as inappropriate, but not in these books, no.
So thank you very much for your papers and for your presentations, and we can wrap up this first session, I think. And on behalf of the organizers, I invite you for the second session, which starts at noon. Thank you very much.